Zollinger, and I am the manager of the Googlers Give team. Googlers Give is the team that helps you give and volunteer as Googlers. And last fall we started, or actually last November, we started thinking about how we can bring Googlers together around causes and thematic areas of social interest. And we launched the first hunger campaign, Hunger and Poverty Alleviation, in November of last year. It brought together about 6,000 Googlers via a quiz about learning about the issues around hunger and then giving and volunteering opportunities around the world. So we decided, let's look at Earth Day and the environment. We know Googlers are very, very concerned about the state of our planet and are trying to find ways to make a difference. And in particular, what we've seen is a strong interest in wildlife preservation, conservation. And so the theme for the Environment Campaign really took that turn and that twist. The Environment Campaign actually ends today, and so this is the capstone event of the Environment Campaign that launched on Earth Day. The next big thing coming up is Google Serve, which will be June 7th through 14th. And I saw philanthropy on the potty. I don't know if our wonderful ambassador Aaron had something to do with that or somebody else here at YouTube, but there's a great story of some of the things that people did in Google Serve last year, and we hope that you participate in volunteering for a Google Serve project coming up June 7th through 14th. Today, we're here to really focus on the Environment Campaign. We're really lucky to have an eminent expert in wildlife conservation and preservation in Peter Knights from WildAid. We're going to start with a short video to kind of set the context. The way it's going to go today is we're going to have a little visual and then have a little talk, and then a little visual and a little talk. And then we'll end it with questions and answers from you. So with that, let's roll the first video from WildAid to set the stage.
You don't have to be the world's fastest man to beat a speeding bullet. Support conservation, and we can save our big cats. When we all come together, we can do anything.
WildAid is a perfect fit for YouTube. This is what they do to get the message across about what we can do to save endangered species around the world. And as I said, we're really, really lucky to have Peter Knights here, the executive director of WildAid. Peter and I were talking a little bit over lunch. What a background you have. Let's explain to the group why you are the executive director of WildAid and what WildAid does.
Last man standing, basically. But I started off my career, originally I was an economist. I went to London School of Economics, and I left university, and I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I knew that I didn't want to dedicate my life just to making money. Big mistake, but with hindsight. But really, my ambition has always been to try and leave the world a tiny bit better off when I leave than when I joined. And I believe the environment is one of the areas where, no matter who you are or where you are or how much money you have, we all share the same environment. We all stand to lose elephants. We all have to breathe the same air. And I think if ever we're going to learn how to work together as opposed to fight each other and compete, it's going to be through the environment. So that's why I decided to do this. And my first thing that I got involved with was Greenpeace. And through that, I met some people from an organization called the Environmental Investigation Agency. And they specialized in doing undercover investigations of illegal wildlife trade. So we would create fake companies, fake business cards. It was faxes in those days, not internet, to date myself. And we would try and infiltrate the illegal wildlife trade to find out what was going, and then using extremely badly hidden cameras, we would film people and put that on television to try and move governments forward to try and stop some of these abuses of wildlife. And then from that, I got to work in 40-odd countries worldwide on different illegal wildlife problems. And a lot of the work led to Asia. And in Asia, what we found was that people just didn't understand the problem. So it wasn't that people were maliciously didn't care about rhinos or elephants or bears or sharks. They just didn't associate these products with the actual animals, nor were they aware that these animals were becoming endangered, driven by the trade in their body parts. So it became clear that what was needed was a massive education and awareness campaign, and hence we started to work with media. Environment is often very bad news, and people can only take so much bad news. So what we try and do through our campaigns is to keep these issues interesting, exciting, not hopeless, because I don't believe any of these things are hopeless. And very often, environmental, you go, my God, I want to shoot myself after I heard that story. But in actual fact, there is hope and there is a way forward. And that's been the spirit of the campaigns, using not only athletes, but also celebrities. Jackie Chan has been with us for a number of years doing projects, and people like Yao Ming, and influential business leaders, to get the message over. So, asking people from China to talk to Chinese rather than us as Americans talking to Chinese.
And so WildAid has certain focus areas for your programs, and explain what those are and why you chose those.
Well, we take a couple of different questions and we ask, what do we do and what don't we do? The first thing is somebody else doing it, in which case we're like, fine, we don't need to do it. But secondly, it's also, can we make an impact on those issues? And so most recently, we've spent a lot of time working on the shark fin soup issue and sharks. I mean, to me, one of the biggest environmental disasters going on. Up to 73 million sharks are killed a year for shark fin soup. And this is an industry which used to be very small, and it was very high end, so it used to be very limited. And with the economic growth in China in particular, we've just seen this business explode. And sharks are very slow reproducing animals. They're not designed really to be preyed on by other animals. They're usually top of the food chain. And human beings have come in as a super predator, and it's been pretty disastrous for shark populations. And even to the extent in Chinese that shark fin soup is called fish wing soup. People don't even know it's coming from sharks, let alone the biology of sharks, which makes them so vulnerable. So that's been a major campaign we've been working on recently with some pretty significant success in that.
Should we show the shark fin video?
If you've got that queued up, that's perfect.
What if you could see how shark fin soup is made? If you could see how each year up to 70 million sharks are killed to end up in soup, could you still eat it? A third of all shark species are nearly extinct, but we can help save them.
Remember, when the buying stops, the killing can too.
So that's Yao Ming, great, Chinese and an American icon from the Houston Rockets, but that's in English. How does that translate back?
Well, everything we do, anything you see today has been done in Mandarin. And the first ad you saw with Maurice Green, that was in the lead up to the 2008 Beijing Olympics. So we recruited by the end 20 Olympic gold athletes, themed it around the Olympics, and managed to get out a massive campaign around the Olympics in China, which obviously the Olympics is probably one of the biggest events to happen in China ever. And we got conservation a little piece of it, which was by using the heroes that were there, we got the message over, hopefully in an interesting and inspiring way that wasn't seen as being sort of critical or punitive, but saying, hey, we've all got to solve this together. And that's partly the spirit of the Olympics. So we tried to embody that around then. Yao has been our major spokesperson on the shark fin campaign. As you say, he's a huge star in more sense than one in China. Having traveled around Africa with him last year, I can tell you, being 7'6" is not easy, especially when you have to get into small planes and things like that. But he's a fantastic guy and very smart. He's now actually doing a history degree. I don't know how many professional athletes after their career go back and do college again, but that's the kind of guy he is. And he's been fantastic as a spokesperson for the campaign and obviously hugely influential in China.
How has the shark fin campaign made a difference? What's the before and after, and is it still running?
It's still running. I mean, as somebody once said, a very wise man once said, in the environment, our victories are temporary and our losses are permanent. And I think that's very true. So we can never give up these things. But we've seen consistently all around the world how we've been able to reduce shark fin consumption by about a third. We were sued in Thailand by the shark fin traders for cutting their business by 50%. And most recently, in 2012, the Chinese government actually banned shark fin from state banquets, which is very significant. And the data we're getting back now is that in 2012, the shark fin trade was reduced between 50 and 70% in China, which is talking really tens of millions of sharks. And we're getting messages back from the field saying that fishermen aren't going out to catch the sharks anymore because it's not economic. The fuel costs are too much. So that's the goal in all these.
This is where your economics degree came in handy.
I did remember a little bit of economics. Some of it stayed there.
Nice.
And what's really different about WildAid and our approach is most efforts in conservation are supply side. They're about trying to protect the species in the wild or study the species or pass laws. Nobody was looking at the demand. Mm-hmm. And my economics told me, if you don't address the demand, all you're necessarily going to do by greater protection is probably push up the price. And so if you can reduce the demand at the same time, you reduce the economic incentive to do the activity, then that's got to be the only, frankly, the only long-term solution to this. And I think a lot of people thought it may be impossible to affect the demand, but what we've done is we've used exactly the same tools that a commercial company would use to promote a product, to stigmatize a product. So we've used, top athletes, movie stars, et cetera, as our spokespeople, just as a brand might use a celebrity spokesperson. We've used high-end advertising techniques. We've used billboards, television, and we've been lucky enough in China to have the support of the Chinese government. So all this stuff goes out on state TV. And in the United States, public service announcement, you have to be up at 3 a.m. in the morning to see it. But in China, we've been getting these slots out, like that slot with Yao Ming has been out at 7 o'clock prime time, and somebody commented they'd seen it countless times. So we're actually, in China, we're able to get these out the same kind of level as a commercial company would. So we are able to influence a lot of different people. And when I go to China, I see our ads in the back of the taxi. When I get out of the airport, we see them in the airports. We see them on the national television.
How have you managed to have that great relationship with that government?
Well, I think first of all, the Chinese government wants to do the right thing on a lot of these things. It doesn't always get there, as many governments don't, but they want to do the right thing. And last year we had over $200 million worth of free media space from China, and I'd be surprised if we could ever get that in the US. But so there is a desire from people in China to want to do something about this. A lot of people know this is an issue. You've got to remember, with something like rhino horn, for example, this is a minuscule proportion of people in China that would consume rhino horn. The vast majority, we just did a survey, and 95% of people in China said the government should do more to help rhinos, and the same with elephants. So there is, as people get the education, the awareness, there's been a tremendous affinity, I think, in China, that people want to do the right thing, they want to be on the right side. And it's really just been catalyzing that action.
Well, let's turn the conversation to elephants for a minute. We'll run a short video on elephants, I believe, and then we'll talk a little bit about that and the demand for ivory.
Bigger, stronger, and more domineering than any other. Elephants are the centers of the animal kingdom, but unfortunately today, they're under attack. Tens of thousands are being killed each year just for their ivory. So please support conservation and never buy products made from ivory, because when the buying stops, the killing can too.
So, NBA is tremendously powerful in China, a very popular sport. And, with the elephants, I think we really look back as to, it was the first thing I really kind of worked on back in 1989. And we were in a crisis with elephants back in 1989, and some people are too young to remember this, but prior to 1989, ivory trade was legal internationally around the world. And under a system of regulated trade, the elephant numbers fell from 1.2 million to 600,000 in 20 years. And so this regulated trade was actually enabling massive illegal activity to go on through laundering processes. And in 1989, there was an international ban on ivory trade. Essentially overnight, because of all the publicity and the awareness, the market in the United States and Europe, which were significant markets, collapsed completely. And for about 15 or 20 years, the African elephant was actually doing fine. It was actually recovering. And then from about 2006, 2008 onwards, first of all, they allowed a legal sale of ivory from Africa to China. And then we just saw the poaching going through the roof. And the two major factors I can identify are, one, there is a much greater Asian and particularly Chinese presence in Africa now, doing many construction projects. Right. So in some ways, the market has come to Africa. But also the growth of the Chinese economy has meant many more people can afford it. And these are people that back in 1989 didn't have access to international media and certainly didn't have access to the kind of money to buy ivory. So we've got a new wave of consumers, if you like, yeah, which is now driving this range of this poaching epidemic. And so, again, every time I've seen these poaching things get bad, it correlates with an expansion in the consuming market. So, back in the 1970s and 80s, there was a market for rhino horn as dagger handles in the Yemen. And when there was the oil boom of 73, and a lot of Yemenis were working the Saudi oil fields, suddenly that market went up. So when it gets back to it, to me, it's all about economics. It's not about biology. And unfortunately, it's not about laws. It's about economics. And
well, it's making things that people think are prized and special or elite when you have the economic power to buy that. You have to, like you said, stigmatize them and make them not cool anymore.
Exactly, because, you know, I mean, 15 years ago, the only people in China able to afford shark fin soup would be government officials, frankly. Now, there are many more people. I mean, we did a survey, and it looked like up to 100 million people in China were consuming shark fin soup. So this was, although this was a traditional product, it was never traditional to consume on these levels. And that's the essence of most of these problems, is these are things which have some cultural history, but were always done on a tiny scale. It was a thing kings and lords could do, and now it's everyone can do it, and it's much easier to ship things around the world now, you know, globalization. People FedEx some of these things sometimes, scarily. So, you know, we've got to cope with a new era, and media is part of coping with that era, I think.
Right. How do you see these things picked up? I mean, with the ivory trade, and you've seen like that it has, through the media campaign, you're making a big difference in that. But how does that get spread outside of the channels that you're using, the traditional media channels, are, you know, YouTube, here we are.
Yep.
How do these stories get spread more and more so it becomes this ubiquitous thought, we don't do this? I don't buy that.
No, and it does. And, you know, it's always interesting. We did a lot of work, conventional media, with Yao, for example. We do a press conference, and, you know, by serendipity, there's a few things that have happened in the history that kind of played into our hands in some ways. But Yao Ming's first team was called the Shanghai Sharks. And when he retired, he bought the Shanghai Sharks. So we had, you know, Yao saves the Sharks, literally and metaphorically. But every time we've done this, there's an explosion of activity on the microblogs in China, which is one of the premium mediums. I mean, my understanding is one of the big differences in China between social media is a lot of it is cell phone based, because a lot of people still don't have very good internet connections. And also, this tends to be like the microblog, sort of extended Twitter type thing, which gets the word out. And so, you know, we've had an overwhelmingly positive reaction from the younger audience. And how that feeds back, I've seen so many times, is that, you know, CNN did a piece on the shark fin campaign, and they had this shark fin trader. He said, I've been in the business for 50 years, and my future's never looked so gloomy. And it said at the end, but he doesn't eat shark fin soup anymore because his grandchildren asked him not to. So, like, even the guy selling it will not eat it anymore because of the influence of his grandchildren. And so, you know, I think social media is very, very important. We tend to seed things through conventional media, particularly because if you get on CCTV1, you have the weight and support of the government implicitly. So that means everyone knows, like, okay, so the government's on board with this. So, and the interesting thing I find in China is that although, you know, people talk about sort of political censorship and things, on the environment there's been a fantastic amount of debate. And the government seems to have decided that environment is a legitimate place for people to express their feelings. Wow. And so you see a lot of quite critical pieces on the environment in China, and largely through social media. Mm-hmm. So we do have pretty good relationships with Sheena.com over there, who just covered our Yao Ming story exclusively and helps put it out, and also QQ, which is Tencent, the instant messaging, who I think has something like 700 million subscribers or some crazy number. And we have a microsite on their website. So, you know, we're going to be using social media more and more as we've been able to build up our staff presence. But it's very important, and everything I see is an incredible support for these movements from the internet.
And you mentioned China, and when we were talking earlier, you said if you're not playing in China, given the new consumer market, you really aren't going to address this at all. But what are other countries or other parts of the world that WildAid is really taking a deep dive into?
Well, we've done a lot of work consistently in Southeast Asia. And again, one of the other things that gives me hope is, you know, we did a lot of work with the Rhinos, for example, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, when those countries were the problems, because that was where the money was. And, you know, the Clinton administration sanctioned Taiwan over rhino horn trade. And for 20 years, the rhinos were doing well, and they were increasing. So we did manage to basically suppress and close down the market in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. But a new market emerged, which was Vietnam now and China. And so we've got to go around and redo that same job again now with these new countries. But I look back and I say, look, you know, this worked for 20 years. Because some people say, well, you know what, bans don't work and it doesn't happen. It's like bans without education don't work. Sure. If people understand why something is banned and they're sympathetic to it, then a ban can be very, very effective.
It's just like telling somebody you can't have that and then you want it more. Sometimes, maybe.
Potentially, but it all depends the process.
If they understand why.
Exactly. And the process with the ivory trade ban was that it had international media everywhere. Everyone was seeing poached elephants everywhere. And everyone was like, oh, this really sucks. I didn't realize that was how ivory comes. Right. And they don't do it anymore. So we've seen successful periods of conservation with both the elephants and the rhinos. And then we've seen when a new market emerges, it causes problems. So you kind of have to counter those things. So Southeast Asia has been very important to us. We've done campaigns. You may have heard a couple of years ago here, we've got shark fin banned in California. Right. And people said at the time, well, California is a relatively small market. And my argument was, yes, but you know what? It's a very influential market. And people look to California to see what are the new environmental things that are happening. And I'm pretty certain that California ban was influential in those people giving up shark finning in China as well. So
Terrific. So talking about rhinos a bit, let's run the Rhino PSA. This one might be a little sensitive for people, to just let you know.
这是犀牛桑迪，这头白犀牛很不简单，它曾惨遭偷猎者的毒手。偷猎者用麻醉枪将它击倒，然后用斧子连脚带脸都砍了下来，就是为了获得它的脚。尽管桑蒂经历痛苦和多次手术，但他活了下来。为了帮助更多的犀牛生存下来，结束残忍的犀角交易，请不要购买犀角制品，因为没有买卖就没有杀害。
I love it. When the buying stops, the killing stops. It's a great tagline.
Very simple idea. In Chinese, it's actually just no buying, no killing. And so, and I actually was in China recently with a very senior government official, and he said to me, he said, you know what? Because of all this stuff, everybody in China knows your slogan. And I said, well, that's very, very kind of you, but I don't really think that's the case. And he called over the waiter, and he said, what's the slogan about conservation? The waiter trots out this slogan. And one of my other colleagues was right out in a sort of very rural area, and she said, oh, I saw your Yao Ming thing going out there. So, the Chinese government's distribution network reaches everybody through CCTV, and they've been one of our main sponsors and supporters. So, and people are now using the slogan without saying anything about WildAid, which is great. So, Chinese TV was saying, when the buying stops, the killing can too. It's become a bit of a mantra, which is fantastic.
It's not about WildAid, it's about
Absolutely, and that's always what we said right from the start, is like, when we got all this free media space and things, first of all, we didn't even have a name on it. Because we said it's not about us. It's not about us. It's not about branding us. It's not about us raising money. It's about attitudinal change. And so I think that's been key to what we've been able to do, is we've been prepared to say we'll step back as an organization. Suicide for fundraising probably, but in terms of getting people to accept the ideas, as their own and participating, definitely the right way to go.
Well, you're building a social movement, not just building an organization, and that's a bigger mission, right?
Yeah.
Explain, I'm naive, on rhino horn. What is it used for?
Well, it's been used in traditional medicine as a fever reducer, as part of traditional medicine. And a lot of people say, well, traditional medicine, BS. There is a lot of traditional medicine which has, roots, and a lot of Western medicine is derived from natural sources. But with rhino horn, it has been thoroughly tested, and the only property it's been seen to have is, in very large quantities, it reduces fever mildly. So the pharmaceutical companies in the West decided there's nothing really worth pursuing in here. But that was the traditional use. But what we find now, we've just done a survey, so I can say this with some authority, that people believe that it can be an aphrodisiac. They believe, in some cases, it's a hangover cure in Vietnam. So we've actually gone, and some people even believe it cures cancer. And basically, rhino horn is keratin. It's what your fingernails are made of, it's what your hair is made of. It's actually made of compressed matted hair. And so, there's an element of snake oil in all this stuff. Again, this is sort of, when you're talking about faith-based medicine, it's quite hard to get around that. So we don't usually take it on by saying, it doesn't work. We usually try instead to appeal to people's better sense of, look at what you're causing to happen. And, that rhino there, Tandy, the stories now is that because, if you shoot a rhino, there's a gunshot. And what they've been doing now is using tranquilizer darts, which are silent, cutting the face off the rhino while it's still alive, just to get these horns. Yeah. And, they could actually take the horn off and leave the rhino alive, but they want to get every bit of rhino horn, so they take the whole face off. And Tandy is actually one of the few rhinos that survived that process. But it's horrible what's going on.
Right. And explain the habitat for the rhino. Where does Tandy live?
Tandy lives in South Africa, and the rhinos, for most endangered species, the biggest threat is habitat loss. They're running out of space. Human beings are taking over the land for agriculture. With rhinos, there is absolutely no shortage of habitat. We could quite easily accommodate 300,000 or 400,000 rhinos, and yet there's about 27,000, 30,000 left, just because of the horn. Yeah. So, there's no shortage. And some of the last rhino in Vietnam was poached in 2011, I think it was.
No more there.
no more. Well, most of the Asian rhinos, they're down to like 50 or 100, the two species now. Having said that, the white rhino, which is Tandy is one of them, came back from 50 individuals to 22,000. So again, this is a reason for hope. When they're not being poached for their horn, we can bring them back into significant numbers. So we really do have to address this problem, otherwise we won't succeed. But I'm optimistic that if we can address the trade issue, a lot of these animals can bounce back to decent populations.
And we touched on a few of the animals that you're working to try to bring awareness to. What other areas of focus do you have?
Well, we're working on tigers and a few other species, but as an organization, we're actually starting work on climate change as well, because what we're about is behavior change, communication for behavior change, attitudinal behavior change, and many of these animals will be threatened by climate change, as well as us in different ways. And because of our presence in China, as well as our connections in China, in fact, the Chinese government came to us, a very senior person in the Chinese government came to us and said, we love what you're doing with wildlife trade, but our bigger problem is climate. Will you help us work on the climate? So
Similar from a campaign structure?
Exactly.
Right.
Same kind of campaign to sensitize people in China to what they can do about mitigating climate change. And I said, wow, yes, we'd love to. It's hard for us to finance it because we're not from that world, but basically the techniques we have, I think, are applicable. And so we're just starting that campaign now, and the government's given us the full backing. And then the other area we work on is marine protection. And again, we looked at what are the gaps, what's not happening. And we've been, I think, instrumental on trying to use new technology to protect marine areas. And the biggest challenge for this thing is, one, there's resources, but, the Galapagos Marine Reserve we work in is the size of New York State. Massive area. And boats are slow, very expensive to maintain, believe me. If you ever want to lose money, buy yourself a boat. Maintenance, fuel, et cetera, is very expensive. But the new technology is getting beyond that. So one of the things we're employing is satellite vessel monitoring. So this uses satellite to basically track the boats in the same way that air traffic control uses transponders. You can see what the boat is, how fast it's going, what direction. And now, we don't need a big boat to be out at sea trying to find these people. We have them on a radar screen. Mm-hmm. And basically, you can even program it so that it recognizes fishing behavior. A boat does a certain thing. When it fishes, it stops, it puts out a line, there's a pattern. So we actually have a situation now where our guy in Galapagos, who's basically sitting at a computer screen, he can be enjoying a beer in the bar, and his cell phone will tell you, oops, we've got a problem, and you can see exactly where it is, what's going on. You send a small boat to intercept it. So you're literally saving millions of dollars a year and having really good coverage. And so now what we see in Galapagos is right around the border of the Marine Reserve, all these fishing boats are queued up. Literally on the border. You can draw the border of the Marine Reserve by where the boats are.
They know they can't come in.
They know they can't come in. If they come in, they're going to get caught. So that's making marine protection of these areas more and more affordable. And even technology like drones is being used in this sort of stuff now. So suddenly marine protected areas, which really are the poor cousin, our national park system is the backbone of conservation on land.
But it's such an arbitrary line, right? Who's out there policing it? Right?
Well, that's it. But, we've got to get more. Right now, there's about 1% of the world's oceans are marine protected areas, and it needs to be more like 10 or 15. But one of the arguments against it was we can't protect it. We can't enforce it. New technology is helping to solve that. So.
That's fantastic. Want to go ahead and roll your movie trailer?
Sure.
Got a movie. Okay, let's roll that.
I almost travel all over the world doing my professional basketball career, but never on Africa.
Houston Rockets select Yao Ming from Shanghai, China.
They have a unique culture here. They have a unique understand living with all the living things.
chopped off the face and removed all the tusks.
They get close to a herd, and then they just open up and shoot.
This is where they hacked away at her face.
Since 2008 or so, there's been a massive epidemic of poaching of ivory in West, Central and East Africa, and of rhinos down here in South Africa.
The poaching right now is the worst that it's been since the ivory trade ban came in 1989.
They say they lose 2 rhinos every 18 hours.
We've arrested people with AK-47s.
There are helicopters involved. They've got dart guns. They've got night vision goggles.
China is driving the illegal trade in ivory more than any other country in the world at this time. You have unprecedented wealth, and middle-class people who could never afford ivory in the past are suddenly consumers.
People in China were not aware that these beautiful items that they bought, each one was causing the death of an elephant.
They are not just these big prehistoric creatures. They actually have personalities. They feel pain, they feel distress, they feel fear.
When you touch a tusk like that, just only that big, you feel that it's just an animal at age maybe 5 or 6 years old. It's really make you feel sad about what we did.
The scary thing is, at this point in time, there's no end in sight.
If we talk about 23,000 rhino, they'll be gone in a flash.
When you kill elephants, you're killing our livelihoods.
We have to understand we share this world with all the living things on this planet.
It was amazing that this man, who is so highly respected in his own community, is prepared to put his name to this crisis.
It's been incredible, the support that we've got, and we've had nearly 100 different celebrities that have carried this message. The support of the Chinese government has been critical. Having the support of the Chinese media has been absolutely phenomenal.
When the buying stops, the killing can too.
Our goal is to reach hundreds of millions of people in China and beyond with this film, as part of what is already the largest wildlife awareness program ever.
We are going to name you the Nasaka because we want you to be our elephant defender.
Just think about 3 weeks ago, the elephant's still running and playing with others. I believe the people who've seen those pictures will remember it. That's what we're here for. Film this, bring it back to home, show to everybody, and show everybody the reality.
It's a bad nightmare, although it's horrific, but I do believe it can be stopped.
I just hope we can keep this land still peaceful, full of life, with all the people here and animals, so we can come back one day and say, we still hoped here.
He is tremendous, and that it is a huge battle that he's taken on, and he's going home and sharing the story, and it's going to make a huge difference. And this whole campaign is amazing. So this is a trailer that you have. How long is the full documentary?
I haven't made it yet.
You haven't made it yet.
Still trying to raise the money. Still trying to raise the money for it. No, we hope to get it out by January next year, and CCTV looks like they're going to take it on and do 1 hour special on elephants and 1 on rhinos. And you know, when we did his blog on that trip, it got 1 million followers, which was great. And so we really, I mean, we don't normally do long format documentaries, but in this case, because Yao retired, he had the time to do it. And I've always wanted to take either him or Jackie Chan to Africa. One, for them to fall in love, as I think everybody does that goes on these trips. But secondly, to see it from a Chinese perspective, and then to be able to articulate. So now, when Yao talks to people, and he's actually a National People's Congress member now as well, so he may even be moving legislation on this forward, which is great. Being able to speak, from their own personal experience, and you can't go out there and see the stuff that we have to see without it moving you. And we hope that we can bring this back. I think it's probably going to be the first time you've had a Chinese protagonist on a documentary like this, and that's important too, because we want people to aspire to being like Yao, helping the animals. And too often you see criticism of China environmentally, but the reality is there's a lot of quite good things going on in China, and people need encouragement. When they're doing stuff, they need encouragement. And so I hope that Yao will inspire others, and certainly he was inspired by Jackie Chan in our campaign before, so that was nice. That was sort of a generation handover. We hope we can keep to doing that. Yeah.
Well, and the idea that I find so compelling is that the message is clear, and there's an actionable step that somebody can do. It's don't buy that. Make that decision. You're a consumer now, make this choice. So, we've seen that work. You mentioned the younger generation affecting and causing behavioral change in the older generations as well. Right. I remember back in the smoking era.
Smoking is the classic example where kids have influenced the parents.
I used to go around and tell my grandpa, cut it out.
Yeah.
And,
and it's hard to argue with.
Yeah, it does float back up. It's terrific. Thank you for sharing how you're doing it. And this is a different way than a lot of wildlife organizations are attacking these problems. I mean, it is bold. It's in your face. But it's giving you something that you can do. You can make a choice. And interesting way of doing it. But the way you're saying is you're doing it differently than others on purpose because you're dealing with the consumer side, with the buyer side, and most are dealing with the other side. So I think together, kind of put it together. What a powerful opportunity to really save some of the world's most precious species. I'd like to open it up to some questions from the folks here at YouTube. Anybody have anything they'd like to ask Peter?
So I'm very impressed with all the work that you've done, and I was curious more about how it sounded like a lot of the problems were more reactive in terms of like, here's a problem, let's go and fix it now, and then it would come back and we do it again. How are you leveraging technology to be a bit more proactive about future problems that can arise?
To be honest, the problem is not predicting. The problem is getting work financed, and so, we've only just started the elephant and rhino campaigns because I've only just got it financed. And I can tell you right now that every species that's in trade should have some type of campaign like this, in my opinion. The sharks, to a large degree, not many sharks are classified as endangered yet. They're all heading that way. So in many ways, that was our predictive campaign, was to say if we don't carry on like this. The other element that was predictive was working in China. And, there isn't another China in terms of wildlife consumption. There are smaller countries, like some of the Southeast Asian countries, which will grow, like Vietnam's come out there. But the problem with being predictive in this business, unfortunately, is resources. We're having a hard time funding this now because it's not conventional. It's not the conventional approach. So, there's probably between $50 and $100 million spent at the supply end for rhinos or elephants every year. And there's up to recently, there's been nothing spent on the demand end, and now there's about $300,000 or $400,000. So it's been very hard to even be, on the crisis, let alone ahead of the curve on this. But my dream for all this, and now, I was in D.C. yesterday, and the Fish and Wildlife Service there, they were all talking about demand reduction now. So it's starting to become more mainstream in people's thinking. And so I'm hopeful that going forward, we can have something which is much more proactive and more predictive. So, when the International Endangered Species List, CITES, puts a species on that list, in my opinion, there needs to be a campaign to publicize that. And that would be my goal, is to have these kind of campaigns running all of the places they need to be running, but also to be looking at what's the next problem going to be, and let's head it off. Having said that, I do think that the campaign, we featured many different animals, and I think it's almost like a brand. You're trying to go beyond the individual message. So now the slogan, I hope with the elephant campaign, people will be like, well, this is just like the sharks. These animals have been killed for pretty senseless use, and there's too many people buying it. And as you say, the reaction is the same, don't buy it, or tell other people not to buy it. So I hope we're being somewhat predictive in terms of now setting a precedent out there where the species come up, people already, okay, we recognize this problem, we know what we have to do about it.
Right. But I would imagine that really looking at partnerships with technology companies to leverage technology to predicting fever outbreaks and, looking for technology partners to scale.
I'm not sure the prediction thing is that complicated. I could tell you now that, the countries that, you just look at where the economics are going. And so you look at any country that's rising economically that has some history of this use, you say that may be a problem for us. Where I think technology and the companies can help is getting the message out. And getting the message out creatively. I mean, we were talking before about, we actually did a PSA competition in China, and like 1 million people voted on the competition. But maybe we could do something with YouTube about, how would you get this message over and use that, and can we make it go viral? And I think there's tremendous usage there. And then similarly with some of the technology on the marine protected areas, again, I know Google's funded some work on drones, for example. There's definitely a good connection there. But I think from my point of view, it's how can we use social media to get the message out wider and more consistently and make some of these things go viral.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier that anyone who actually goes to these environments and sees what's happening can't help but be moved by what they're seeing. I realize that there are a lot of limitations to getting people actually there. It's very costly and all that stuff.
Especially when you're 7'6" as well, I can tell you.
Yeah. But are there any, I guess, organizations that instead of having tourists going out on safaris, going out instead and trying to help with organizations like WildAid or other nonprofits?
There are some that do that for on-the-ground conservation projects. I mean, if it was us, I'd have to call it something like Holidays from Hell. But believe me, you don't want to stand next to a rotting carcass of an elephant. It's not very pleasant, and emotionally as well, it's pretty draining, I have to tell you. But yes, there are a number of organizations that do volunteers. So Save the Elephants you saw there, they have volunteers come and help them work out there. And there's
They're
actually
a strong partner for you, correct?
Yeah. And there's a guy who should be in the film called Simba, who is Chinese, even though he has a Swahili name, and he has Chinese. Normally, children from quite wealthy Chinese come out and volunteer on his project, which again is a great way of seeding back the message and getting it back there. And I think increasingly what we're seeing now is. There's going to be tremendous interest from China. There's tremendous economic interest from China in Africa. It's the biggest investor in Africa now. And as we said to people sometimes, why buy an ivory carving when for less money you can take your whole family out and see a live elephant and have an experience of a lifetime? Because part of the other thing we want to do with this film is to explain to people that, you don't need to be scared of going to Africa. It's a pretty safe place, and you're not going to come down with dengue fever the first day you arrive and things like that. And so to encourage more and more people from China to go to Africa and see for themselves.
And Google has a huge emerging market effort in trying to help people with their economic prosperity and be entrepreneurs and put their businesses online. And as we do that, in our role, we just kind of wonder how do we do that and help people in a really socially responsible way as they become new consumers and build those economic, kind of prosperities in their countries, making sure that this is part of the conscience somehow. It's something maybe
it's all
we
about
can
awareness, and it's also about just trying to make these things fashionable, if you like, because somebody said, what are you trying to do? It's like, well, I'm trying to brand conservation in China. The conservation is just like a Nike or something like that, but it's something that people aspire to. They have a good feeling. It's not just about saying, don't buy it. It's about saying, I want to be on Yao Ming's side. I want to be part of his team and feeling like that. And I think that's very important. And from what we've seen so far, particularly with social media, there was an internet survey done. 27,500 people said ban the shark fin, and 400 people said don't. Wow. So, particularly with the young community, there's a strong, strong feeling for this stuff.
Hi. You mentioned that there was that, I guess, fishermen, like shark fishermen's trade union or trade organization that kind of sued you. In the United States, there's a lot of media that kind of attacks people who try to get the message out on climate change. I was wondering, do you see that often in other types of conservation, like maybe with traditional medicine, like some sort of trade organizations or something? Yeah, the traditional medicine isn't very well organized. The shark fin traders who tried to sue us, and again, they were pretty stupid, frankly, because ultimately the whole campaign just kept the campaign alive. It was in the news every day in Thailand, and it became more of a self-fulfilling prophecy than shutting us up. And in the end, the judge found that everything we said was accurate. So it didn't really do them very good. But, the US is obviously probably the most litigious place on the planet. But, and you see that here, I think, with the debate, the sort of gag orders on food, on commenting on food. We're the democratic country. And ironically, in China, the shark fin traders, I was told, went to the government and said, oh, these people are attacking our business and you should close them. The Yao Ming shouldn't be involved. And the government said, actually, it's up to Yao Ming. If he wants to be involved, that's fine. So kind of ironic. Also ironic that, the images that we have, the hard images, which you do have to show, it does, the amount of people that come up to me and say, I don't eat shark fin soup anymore because I saw how they were killing the sharks. It's very, very powerful to show that. We wouldn't be able to show that on US TV. It would be censored or cut. Because if you've got blood or anything with animals, they'll show you all kinds of horrible things in movies. But when it comes to anything nasty happening to an animal, there's big restrictions on it. In China, they haven't. They've showed that footage even at prime time and haven't really
hold back, which again is encouraging.
What about like labeling of products? Is that something that you're seeing? You know, remember like the no animal testing type of stuff, or
it's starting. All the trends that happen over here are starting to take on in China, and so, for example, one of the things we're trying to do on climate change is they have an energy labeling scheme with like rating for appliances, and there's one problem in that when they did the scheme originally, they didn't calibrate it properly. So we've got to try and work with the government to get it recalibrated. But then there's been no promotion of it. So they've got compulsory energy labeling, but nobody's gone out and said, this is why you should use it. Or what I want to do is like, say, you'll save this much money by buying this unit and things like that. So yeah, all that stuff is everything we do here is in China now. China's so changed since I've been working there. So much of what's going on in China is cutting edge. I was speaking to somebody from James Cameron's organization yesterday. They've got a big studio they're building in China, 3D, and I think China is a pretty sophisticated place in many ways now and in many different places. And I think one of the most capable countries in the world, frankly. And I think if we can get them on this, then I think they can solve this problem pretty quickly.
Hi. So it sounds like WildAid is very focused on conservation and on endangered species. And I don't know much about it yet, but I recently learned that China also has bear farms, and they use bear materials for various medical uses. And I was wondering, what's your opinion on the need to publicize animals that aren't necessarily endangered, but maybe should be wild or are mistreated, and people still aren't aware of what happens to the products that they receive? Yeah, and the bears is an interesting one. I actually filmed those bear farms back in, oh my God, I don't want to date myself here, 1995. And the one thing about bear gall is this is the one that really works. This is actually something that has properties. But what we've done in Western medicine is we've taken that property, which is a unique acid which occurs in bear bile, and we've synthesized it. And we can make them like we make aspirins. And that's the step they haven't made in China. They've gone halfway, which is to mechanize the process, which is to put these bears into these horrible farms where literally these bears are in a cage the size of the bear. And daily they will milk the bile from them. And we have done some work on that. There's more sensitivity to that, funnily enough, because it is seen as a part of traditional medicine. And for a lot of people in China, the only medicine system is traditional medicine. Right. So the government is very, very defensive of traditional medicine. But what we've tried to do with that is work with traditional medicine practitioners who will say there's alternatives within traditional medicine. There's other things you can use within traditional medicine, because a lot of people use traditional medicine because it's cheap. The irony with these endangered species products, they're very expensive. So, that is another campaign. Again, it's part of the sensitization. It's taken off in China now, so there's opposition within China itself to the whole bear farming industry. But that's still one that's out there. They also have tigers in tiger farms as well. Nearly 10,000 tigers in tiger farms. And there was a big move to try and legalize tiger products from these tiger farms. And working with Jackie Chan and Yao and people like that, we were able to head that one off at the pass. Because the danger is with these things is, particularly with traditional medicine, is there's a belief that, part of what you're doing is you're getting the power of the animal. And so even though you might have farm tigers, a farm tiger is not the same as a wild tiger. So what you may be doing is all you're doing is creating a mass market. There's still the market for the high-end stuff is still there, which you may be promoting. So we've done some work on bears. I'd like to do some more work on bears in the future. And, the bears, Asiatic bears are endangered. There's only about 50,000 left. So,
oh, wow. Yeah. We had another question next to you?
Thanks for coming. I was just wondering, from all of your experiences, what has surprised you?
What has surprised me, good or bad?
Whichever.
I think both. Well, I think on the bad side, I think from doing the undercover investigations, it's just the crazy things people will do to animals. That it doesn't make sense. A lot of the stuff, because people in the bird trade, for example, did a lot of work on the wild bird trade, which has been greatly decreased through various efforts. But people were feeding baby parrots, and they were using like ketchup bottles in like a conveyor belt like this. And they would overfeed. It was being done so quickly and roughly that 3 or 4 of these birds would choke in the process. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. You're killing the things you're trying to save. But when you have these industrialized processes, people do crazy things. They put too many birds in the box to try and save money, which ends up killing them all. And so it surprised me how irrational people behave on that end. I think on the other end, what surprised me is how quickly people in China and parts of Asia have become sensitized to these issues. So, you know, people, when we started this campaign, people said, oh, you'll never change China. Oh, this has been thousands of years. And my counter is, I don't think there's been anywhere in the history of the planet that's changed as quickly as China has changed in the last 10 years. You know, everything has changed. It's a whole new ballgame. So we're not trying to change things, we're trying to make this part of the change. And what I've found, and has really heartened me and surprised me, is how quickly people get it, and when they get it, how they start to switch to the other side quite rapidly. So an example is, you know, Taiwan did a lot of work there, and you know, it wasn't that long ago when people were involved in eating dogs, for example. And now people have a little dog and it's in the car and it's driving there and it's, you know, part of the family and things like that. And that's happened very quickly, you know, whereas in the West, our sensitivity to animals has evolved over 300 years. And if you were back in the Industrial Revolution and you saw the way we treated animals, you would be truly ashamed. And that's kind of where China is now. But they have to make this change in the space of 10 years, not 300. And it's not just on this, it's on everything else. And what's amazing is they are doing it.
Doing it, yeah.
You know, and you look at how smoking is reduced in China. It used to be everywhere. Now you go into Beijing and the taxis don't smell of smoke, the hotels don't smell of smoke. This has happened in like, you know, a year. You've seen the changes. So the pace of which people are capable of change has surprised me. And it also gives me reason for hope. I believe we can do this in time to save these species.
Thank you. And parting, right before you leave, what do you think we can do as Googlers, as individuals, as YouTubers? What can we do?
Get involved and spread the message of what's going on. And I think, you know, we'd love to work with you guys more on how we can use social media to get these messages out, get people involved and engaged, make it cool, make it fun. Because again, you know, the key to me on any of these issues is very often we have a problem. It gets in the news. It's flavor of the month for like a week or 15 seconds, as they say, and then we move on. And the key to me about solving these problems is keeping it out there for an extended period. So people don't think it's solved and go away, but they keep working. I think that's why we've had the success with the shark. And we've been working on it for a long time, and we haven't gone away. We haven't just done a 6-month campaign and given up. We just stayed on at it.
You can't be the next new shiny thing. You got to stick with this and stick with it.
And then eventually you hit a tipping point.
Yeah.
And you do it.
And there are some things that you can do through Google immediately. WildAid has a project in our Go Give tool. So it's actually, it's also part of the environment campaign. So there are volunteer opportunities for WildAid.
I know nothing about social media, so I need help on social
media. So on that, and there's an AdWords program. They're interested in maximizing their AdWords grant that they have from Google as well. So what I want to do now, though, is thank you.